Steve, one of the questions that a lot of investors face and often agonize over is when to quit their job. A lot of people get into this business with the dream of doing it full time and then eventually doing it, part time and living a full time life that they enjoy doing what they don't have to get paid to do. But the first step in that is getting out of the job for most people. And that's a hard question to try and answer. What advice do you have, or how would you suggest people go about answering the question, when should I quit my job and go full time as a real estate investor?
Well, JP, first of all, I think that there's a number of different ways to approach that. And one of the things that I frequently tell people that really they're the only ones who know whether or not they're ready. They're the ones who know whether or not they are ready to dive in and do whatever it takes to make this business works. But that's not necessarily a good answer. People really want something practical from me. They're like, well, how do I know when it's the right time? And one of the things that I really feel comfortable with, and I lead many of my students down this path, is that for the most part they're already doing it part time, and they know that they can get some deals done. They're just trying to figure out when's the right time to let go of the job and to really dive in and just do nothing but real estate. And so where I feel comfortable, and this is what I've advised many of my students to do, is to really focus on saving up, and this is from the deals that they're doing, putting enough money aside for 1 year's worth of living expenses or 1 year's salary from their current job. And that gives them plenty of time to be able to get a deal done without the pressure of wondering, how do I pay my bills next month? Now, going beyond that, I think that this is sound advice for any real estate investor, not just somebody who's thinking about leaving their job, but for somebody who's already in the business and who is currently making a living as a real estate investor, is to sort of put that money aside and then to pay yourself a salary. And so, my recommendation is get 1 year's worth of expenses put aside, and then pay yourself a salary every couple of weeks, every month, and pay yourself the way you're used to getting paid. If you're used to getting a paycheck from your job every 2 weeks, well, continue to give yourself a paycheck every 2 weeks. And the reason why I make that suggestion is because real estate investors need to get in the habit of living based off of their paycheck, not off of the deal. I've been in this business for a long time, JP, and I've seen many people try to create this steady income in real estate where they have a consistent amount coming in every single month. And I've been doing it long enough to know that that's really just not feasible. You've got big months and you've got small months, and sometimes you've got dead months where nothing's happening. And but all too often, the real estate investor who closes that rehab walks away from the settlement table with a $30,000 or $40,000 profit. For some reason or another, in their mind, many of them think that they're going to make that kind of money every single month. And the reality of the situation is we don't make a consistent income in this business. For some people, they make a whole lot more money, and 30 or 40,000 might be a small month for them, and they've got other months where they're bringing in 100, 110, 120,000, but they tend to live based off of the deal. And where it really becomes a problem is for the investor who makes $30,000 or $40,000 one month. Then all of a sudden they start living like they're going to make that kind of money every month, and they're off eating at the finest restaurants and spending a lot of money. And then 2 or 3 months later, when another check hasn't come in, they're back to ramen noodles like they were in college and trying to figure out how to pay the bills that month because the income is not consistent. So, I'm touching upon two things here. For the person who wants to go full time, put 1 year's worth of salary aside. But I think that even the person who's already full time, that's one thing that they should focus on, getting 1 year's worth of their living expenses set aside, and then every 2 weeks dispersing a check to themselves as if they were just on payroll. And that's what you learn to live off of, is that. Then what you do is every time you do a deal, you replenish that account and you build it back up again so that you always are that you always have 1 year's worth of living expenses aside. And if you decide that you want to start making more money and you want to have a better lifestyle than what you were living based off of those paychecks, well, build that account up higher and then give yourself a raise. But always try to keep a year's worth of living expenses aside. And that gives you a ton of peace of mind of knowing that, when my deal doesn't close or when the settlement falls apart, the world's not going to end. I'm still going to get paychecks. And many investors just operate on this roller coaster of emotions. And when a deal doesn't close, it's like devastating to them because they absolutely needed that money right now. And I have not struggled with that because I have paid myself a paycheck since the very beginning, and I've learned to live off the paycheck rather than the deal. So hopefully that's a tip that people can take and run with.
Yeah, and really, it's kind of the concept of avoiding feast or famine syndrome that so many investors tend to fall victim to. Because, like you said, and I'm thinking of a someone that both you and I mutually know, who you've had conversations with along these lines, where you've really encouraged him to, rather than making the big checks and then running through that money and then suddenly feeling broke and then biding his time till his next big check, setting up kind of a payroll account and paying himself a check regardless of how much he makes, and living within those means. And it doesn't mean he can't live well, but it means that, you know, he and his wife, who really appreciates, women, this is not a sexist remark, but women really appreciate more than men a lot of times the security that comes along with consistent income. And at paying yourself a paycheck from a payroll account that you set aside helps bring that feeling of security that can come with a consistent income, even though really ultimately the source of your income is still rehabbing or wholesaling or whatever your particular investing is.
Yes, and this just sort of levels things out. And don't fool yourself. The men also want that secure income. They always blame it on their wives, but they want it too. And there is, uh, investors who do the feast or famine, the ups and downs. They don't make the best decisions. They're not the best investors because when things, when their back's against the wall, they make poor decisions. And but the investor who tends to do the best, who makes the most, is the one who is steady and even keeled. They don't get desperate. They don't have to do a deal right now so that they can pay bills next week. And they're much better investors. So uh, by doing this, it just creates so much more sanity. It creates a much better environment at home with your spouse because they can know and feel that the security and knowing that paychecks are coming in every couple of weeks. I've seen situations where people have made more money in a month than they've ever made in a year before, and then 3 months later, their wives are hounding them because they haven't taken home a check in 3 months. And that's just the nature of this business. But they were living the high life immediately, after having that gigantic month, and they started getting used to that. And then all of a sudden, the bank account's running dry. They spent more money in 3 months than they ever spent in 3 months before in their lives, and they were disappointed that they couldn't do that every single month. And the reality was they had earned enough in 1 month to get them through the whole year if they would have just paid themselves via paychecks. But so it's one of my tips. And the only thing that I would share, some people might not like to hear that. They might not like the discipline, but I know a ton of successful real estate investors across the country. And I'm going to tell you, this is one of the things that sets them apart from others. They don't live based off of the deal. They live based off of a steady income, a budget that they have put in place. And the deal, every time they do a deal, it just funds another 6 months to a year of living expenses, not 6 weeks. Hopefully, people can take that and use it to improve their businesses.
And just one last remark, I guess, tying that into the original question of knowing when to quit your job. Are you, I guess, suggesting that, in your opinion, once you have a year's worth of living expenses set aside and you have the discipline of paying yourself a salary every 2 weeks that funds your current lifestyle, then that would be a good general rule of thumb for investors as to when they should quit their job.
If they can't, if they can't make that happen, then I think the challenge of starting a business and getting that up and running successfully is also going to be a challenge for them. And most people, some people will feel intimidated by that. They think that they need to go full time to bring in that kind of money. However, when my students who are really determined set something like that up as a goal, you'd be very surprised at how quickly they can save up that kind of money. When they want out of their job bad enough, they can do something like that. Some of them choose to save up just 6 months, some of them go for the full year, but I think that that buys them time. It gives them a peace of mind and allows them to make good decisions as far as building their business. So yeah, I think it's a worthwhile tip. Certainly not an absolute. There's different circumstances, but for those who have a steady job and are used to a steady income, I think that that is a very worthwhile recommendation that they should consider. Yes.